Hey, my name is Caleb Marsh. I'm 29 years old. I live in Clarksville, Tennessee, in a house I'm still fixing up room by room. I work construction, have since I was 17, when my mother's knee gave out and she couldn't keep the night shift anymore and somebody had to. I picked up whatever I could find, framing crews, drywall, fence work in the summers. I learned by watching and by asking questions until people got tired of me asking and just showed me instead. By 21, I had my contractor's license. By 26, I'd hired on with Harrove Construction and stayed. There's a workbench in my garage that I've had since I was 22, 2x4s, a vise clamped to one end, pegboard on the wall with hooks where my tools hang. Every tool in its spot, every project gets finished. The night all of this started, I was standing at that bench, sanding the edge of an oak tabletop I'd been working on for 3 weeks, radio on low. The shop smelled like cedar and sawdust. I wasn't thinking about anything complicated. Then my phone rang. Frank Harrove, my boss. The man who'd given me a job when nobody else would and watched me go from pick-up-and-go grunt to site foreman in 2 years. I picked up. He told me to come to his office the next morning, said he had something to discuss. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound like there was a problem. He just sounded like a man who'd already made a decision and was getting ready to deliver it. I said I'd be there. I set the phone down and went back to sanding. But I couldn't stop thinking about that voice, calm and certain, the way it sounded when a deal was already done. Frank's office was on the second floor, overlooking the equipment yard. Big window, no curtains. He liked being able to see what was moving down there without leaving his desk. I got there at 7 in the morning. His assistant waved me up without speaking. Frank was already standing when I walked in. He shook my hand the way he always did, firm, quick, no ceremony, and pointed at the chair across from his desk. I sat. He stood by the window with his back to me, looking out at the yard. 2 of the crew were loading rebar onto the flatbed. A mixer was turning slow in the corner. "You know," he said, "I never had any sons." "I knew that," I said. "You've got one daughter, Ellie." He turned around. "You know her?" "By sight. We've maybe exchanged 40 words total." He sat down, folded his hands on the desk the way he did when he was thinking through a number, looked straight at me. "I want you to marry her," he said, "and if you do, everything I've built is yours. The company, the equipment, the property holdings, all of it. When I'm done, it passes to you both and you run it." The room went very quiet. The mixer was still turning outside. "Sir," he held up one hand. "Let me finish. I've watched you work for 2 years. You're honest. You don't cut corners. The men trust you. The clients trust you. You're the kind of man this company needs to stay what it is." I didn't say anything. "I'm not asking you to perform," he said. "I'm asking you to consider. Take your time. Think it through. Give me an answer." I asked the only question I could think of. "Does Ellie know about this conversation?" Frank's expression didn't change. "She knows." I thanked him and walked out. I took the stairs slowly. My hands felt strange against the railing. Ellie was at the bottom, standing near the door to the back offices, a folder of papers tucked under her arm. She wasn't facing me, but she turned when she heard my boots on the last step. We looked at each other. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look like someone who just had her future arranged without her input. She looked at me with calm, steady eyes, like she'd already thought this through. "Good morning, Caleb," she said. "Morning." She walked past me toward the back offices, unhurried. I stood there a moment, then walked out to my truck and sat in the cab for 10 minutes without starting the engine. I couldn't figure out what that look meant. I didn't answer Frank the next morning, or the morning after that. I showed up to work, ran the sites, checked materials, signed off on punch lists. I did my job the way I always had, and I tried not to think too hard about the fact that my boss had offered me his company and his daughter in the same breath. The trouble was, Ellie started showing up on job sites. Not intrusively, not making herself a distraction. She'd always done site visits, I found that out later. But I'd never been on the same project during one. Now I was. She walked the concrete pours with a clipboard and asked clear, careful questions. She knew what a slump test was. She knew how to read a grade stake. She didn't perform being competent, she just was. I watched her from across the site the first few times, not obviously. The way you watch someone when you're not sure what you're looking for yet. She moved through a site the way experienced people do, not rushing, not hesitating, just reading the space. She talked to the crew like they were people, not the way some suits did where the warmth was calculated. Just actually, the men noticed. You can always tell when someone's performing for them. The second week, she pulled up to the Meridian Street project in her white Tacoma while I was walking the perimeter. The temperature had dropped overnight, ground firm, sky flat gray. She fell into step beside me without preamble. We walked the whole site without talking much. Near the west corner she stopped and looked at the framing going up across the lot. "My father laid this lot out himself," she said, "about 15 years ago. He measured the grade with a string and a level because he didn't have money for a survey. I looked at the lot. Did it come out right?" She almost smiled. "Close enough." We kept walking. That was most of what we said that afternoon, but I thought about it on the drive home. The way she'd said it, not proudly, not wistfully, just plainly, a fact she carried that meant something to her. "My father measured this ground with a string. I come from the kind of people who make do." I understood that kind of carrying. At the end of that week she brought lunch to the crew. Nothing elaborate. Sandwiches from the diner on 4th, sweet tea and a cooler. The men thanked her and she waved them off like it was nothing. She sat at the fold-out table in the job trailer and ate half a sandwich while I finished a materials order. I didn't ask her about the arrangement, she didn't mention it. We talked about drainage and the weather and the price of lumber. And after a while it felt less like avoiding the subject and more like we'd both agreed, without saying it, to get to know each other before we got to any of that. She started showing up at the trailer most mornings when I was on site. Coffee in hand, laptop open, doing her own work while I did mine. She never asked me to talk, she never made it strange, she was just there. I started learning the shape of her, the way she tapped her pen against the edge of the table when she was working something out. The way she went quiet when she read something that bothered her, not visibly upset, just stilled, like she was processing alone first. The way she laughed at deadpan observations 3 seconds after everyone else, like the joke had to travel a little farther to reach her, but when it did, she meant it more. She asked one afternoon what I did on weekends. "I build things," I said. "Furniture mostly, tables, shelving, a couple chairs. I built a bench for my mother's porch last spring." "Like what?" she said. "Tables mostly." She looked at me. "Can I see the shop?" I said sure, expecting her to forget about it. She didn't. That Saturday she pulled up to my house at 10 in the morning in the same white Tacoma. I walked her out to the garage. The oak tabletop was on the bench, nearly done, final sanding left. She walked around it slowly, running her hands along the grain. Not the way people do when they're being polite about something, the way you do when you're actually paying attention. "You're close," she said. "2 more sessions, probably." She crouched down and looked at the underframe, checked the joinery at the corner, stood back up. "You dovetailed this yourself?" she said. "Hand cut." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You put a lot of yourself into things." I kept sanding. I didn't answer. She didn't push. She stayed 2 hours. We had coffee on the tailgate of my truck, and she told me about her first year at the company, the part where nobody quite knew what to do with the boss's daughter, how she'd had to earn every room she walked into. She said it plainly, without bitterness. "I think people expected me to be decorative," she said, "and I'm not particularly good at that." I looked at the yard. They figured it out eventually. Some of them. She looked at her coffee. "Some people make up their mind about you before you open your mouth and then spend years being surprised that they were wrong." "That's most people," I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." She left before noon. I watched her truck pull out and stood at the end of the garage for a while. The tabletop was almost done. I thought about the way she'd looked at the dovetail joints, the quiet attention in it, like she understood that some things take longer than they should because they're worth doing right. I went back inside and picked up the sanding block. I didn't know what I wanted yet, but I knew I didn't want to stop finding out. The morning routine at the trailer settled into something neither of us named. She arrived between 8:30 and 9 most mornings when I was on site. She'd have 2 coffees from the cart at the end of 4th Street. One black for her, one with whatever I was having that week, which she'd figured out by asking once and not forgetting. She'd set mine on the corner of the folding table and open her laptop, and that was that. We worked in parallel. I noticed that she was good at parallel, at being in the same space without needing to fill it. Most people were bad at that. They'd narrate what they were doing or ask questions to bridge the quiet or shift things around to make the room feel occupied. Ellie didn't. She just worked. And the quiet she brought with her was a different quality than the quiet I was used to. Less like absence and more like company. One morning she looked up from her laptop and said, "Who taught you to build?" "Nobody," I said. "Watched some people. Made a lot of mistakes. The mistakes teach you more than the watching does." "That's true of most things," she said. She went back to her screen. I went back to the drawings. A few minutes later, without looking up, she said, "My father taught himself to read blueprints from a library book. He told me once he checked it out 7 times before he stopped needing it." "He told me that story too," I said. "He tells it to everyone he thinks is worth telling it to," she said. She kept typing. I looked at the side of her face for a moment and then went back to the drawings. My mother knew something was different before I said a word about it. She had that particular skill, the kind that comes from years of watching someone closely because you're the only one watching them. I'd call her on Sundays and she'd ask about work and I'd answer, and then she'd say something like, "You sound different," and I'd say, "Different how?" And she'd say, "Like you're somewhere," instead of "between places." I didn't explain, I wasn't ready to, but she was right. There was an evening in late October, a few weeks after Ellie had first come to the workshop, when I stayed at the bench until past 10. Not because the table needed more work that night, just because the shop felt like the right place to be, and for the first time in a long time I knew why. I was thinking about the way Ellie had crouched down to look at the underframe, the attention in it, the way she checked the joinery with the same care she used on a grade stake, not performing understanding, just actually having it. "You put a lot of yourself into things." It was a simple sentence, but it wasn't a compliment about the table, it was something else. I ran the sanding block along the edge of the top for 20 minutes, doing the same spot over and over until I realized what I was doing and put it down. Then I called my mother and talked about nothing for half an hour. She said goodnight, and then right before she hung up, she said, "Whatever it is, Caleb, just don't be too careful about it." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You know what I mean." I did. About 5 weeks after Frank's offer, Derek Harrove found me at the equipment yard on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank's nephew, 12 years in the company's development division, 40 years old, put together in the way that comes from spending more time in client lunches than on job sites. He walked up while I was checking inventory on the flatbed and said he needed a minute. "I know about my uncle's arrangement," he said. "I want you to understand something before this goes any further." I waited. Ellie didn't ask for this. He kept his voice even, the way people do when they've practiced the conversation. "My uncle told her it was a business solution, that you were the right fit for the company and a formal arrangement would protect the succession. He didn't give her a real choice, he gave her a plan." "You think she agreed under pressure?" "I think she's been agreeing to her father's decisions her whole life," Derek said. "She loves him enough to believe that whatever he decides is right. That's not the same as her choosing you." I set the clipboard on the flatbed. "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at the yard for a moment, his jaw shifted. "Because this company should have passed to me," he said. "I've given 12 years to this place. I know every parcel, every subcontractor, every deal we've ever made. I'm not the villain here. I'm the one who's been here." He walked away. I stood at the flatbed for a long time after. The thing about what Derek said was that it fit. Frank made decisions and made the world line up around them. Ellie loved him enough to go along. I was the man Frank had decided on, which meant Ellie might just be doing what she always did, accepting a plan she hadn't designed because she couldn't bring herself to refuse. I thought about the workshop, the way she'd run her hands along the grain. "You put a lot of yourself into things." I thought about the way she'd meant it, but meaning something about a table and meaning something about a man were two different things. And I'd spent too many years being invisible to people who should have seen me to make myself believe I was something just because I needed to be. About a week later, I was finishing a late walkthrough of the Riverside site when I heard Frank's voice on the floor above me. The building was half occupied. Frank used empty offices for calls he didn't want overheard. I wasn't trying to listen, but the site was quiet and his voice carried. "I told you, I'm managing it." A pause. "That's my decision to make." His voice was lower than usual, harder in a way I'd only heard when something was seriously wrong on a project. "I'm not discussing the timeline. I just need to know she's going to be looked after." Another pause, then, 6 months is an estimate. I know what an estimate means. I stopped moving. His footsteps crossed the ceiling slowly. I heard him exhale. She doesn't know the medical situation. I'd like to keep it that way as long as possible. I need to make sure there's a plan before she knows. The call ended. I heard him walk toward the stairs. I stepped back around a corner and waited until his truck pulled out of the lot. Then I sat down on a stack of flooring samples and stared at the wall. 6 months. Frank had been having me walk taller sites, longer project reviews, more financial reports crossing my desk. I thought it was because he was growing the company. I thought he was building something for the future. He was the future, just not his own. The offer wasn't about legacy or merit. It was a dying man trying to make sure his daughter wouldn't be alone when he was gone. And Ellie didn't know. Which meant she hadn't agreed to protect him, hadn't agreed out of fear. But it also meant I had no idea what she'd actually agreed to or why. I went to find her that evening. She was on the back porch of the Harrove house with a glass of water and a stack of papers she wasn't really reading. The sun was going down behind the tree line. The yard was very still. She looked up when she heard the screen door and didn't seem surprised to see me. I sat down across from her, no preamble. I heard your father on the phone about a week ago, I said. He was talking to someone about his health, 6 months. Something about you not knowing yet. She went very still. He's sick, I said. I don't know what kind or how serious. But he's sick and he made the arrangement for that reason. Ellie set the papers down. She looked out at the yard. She didn't say she already knew. She didn't say she'd suspected. She sat with it the way someone sits with something they had a feeling about and hoped they were wrong. I thought something was off, she said finally, the way he started wrapping things up, being more deliberate. I nodded. I'm not here to tell you what to do, I said. But I talked to Derek. He thinks you agreed because your father gave you a plan and you went along with it. He thinks you didn't have a real choice. She looked at me. Derek thinks a lot of things, she said quietly. Maybe, but I need to know the truth. I held her eyes. Not for the company. I don't care about the company right now. I need to know if you actually want this, if you want me. Or if you said yes because your father needed you to and you didn't know how to say anything else. She didn't answer right away. The yard was still. A bird called somewhere in the tree line and went quiet. I reached down and unclipped the company lanyard from my belt. Set it on the arm of the chair between us. If you want me gone, I said, I'll be gone by morning. No complication. I'll give Frank my notice and you'll never have to think about this again. I meant it. She looked at the lanyard, then she looked at me. And the expression on her face was nothing like what I'd expected. Not relief, not apology, not the careful blankness she wore when she was protecting something. Her eyes were steady, clear. Can I tell you something? She said. Yes. I went to my father first, she said. Her voice was quiet, not hesitant, just measured, the way someone speaks when they've been carrying something and have finally decided to set it down. Before he ever called you into that office, before any of it, I didn't say anything. I went to him and I told him that if there was one person in this company he should trust with it, it was you. She looked at me steadily. I told him I'd watched you work for 2 years, the way you treat the crew, the way you don't let the clients talk down to the men on the ground, the way you stay late without anyone asking. The porch was quiet, and I told him, she said, that you were the only man I'd met in a long time who looked at me like I was a person and not an asset. I sat very still. My father heard all of that, she said, and then he turned it into a deal, because that's the only language he knows. He doesn't know how to be soft. He knows how to shake hands and call something done. A soft exhale. He came to you with an offer because that's how he shows people they're worth something. She looked at the lanyard on the arm of the chair. When he came home that night and told me he'd called you in, he said, Ellie, my daughter, and everything is yours. Her voice shifted lower. And he asked me if that was all right. She looked up at me. The last of the evening light was behind her. I already agreed, she said. I sat without moving, not because I was surprised, because I felt it settle. The truth of it landing somewhere in my chest and needing a moment before I could speak. She had gone to him first. She had chosen before there was an offer, before her father had turned it into the language he knew. I picked up the lanyard from the arm of the chair. I didn't put it back on my belt. I set it on the table beside her water glass. Derek's wrong, I said. Derek doesn't know everything, she said. No, I said, he doesn't. She exhaled slowly. Her shoulders settled like she'd been holding herself up against something and could finally stop. I don't need you to stay for the company, she said. I need you to stay because, she stopped herself. Because? Because you put a lot of yourself into things, she said. And I don't want to watch you walk away without telling you that I see it. The air between us was very warm. I reached across the space and took her hand. She didn't pull away, neither did I. Ellie told her father about the medical call the following week. He tried to be evasive the way he always was about anything that made him feel less than completely in control. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited him out. Eventually he told her the truth. He was working with a cardiologist, a treatment plan, not a death sentence, but serious. He'd known for 3 months before he called me into that office. He apologized the only way Frank could, by squeezing her hand and saying, I just didn't want you to worry before I had a plan. Ellie told me about it later, on the same back porch. She didn't cry, but her voice was thick. He said he wanted to make sure I had something real before he told me, she said. Something he could trust to hold. That sounds like Frank, I said. Yeah, she said, it does. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. We sat there until it was fully dark and the yard lights came on and neither of us felt the need to move. That was new, that particular kind of still, not the stillness of a life going nowhere, the stillness of a life that had found somewhere to be. The months after that were the quietest growing I've ever done. Not dramatic, not the kind of love that announces itself in parking lots or makes speeches in the rain. Just 2 people showing up and learning what the other one needed and trying to give it without making a performance of the giving. I learned that she took her coffee black because she'd given up adding things when she was working and the habit stuck. I learned that she had her father's way of going completely still when she was deciding something important. You'd think she'd stopped listening, but actually she was listening harder than anyone else in the room. I learned that she had a habit of fixing things without mentioning it. A loose hinge on the job trailer, a gap in the window seal at the office. She'd just handle it and move on like it was nothing. I recognized that, handling things quietly, without credit, because something needed to be done and you were the person who saw it. We'd both been doing that our whole lives. She learned that I needed to finish things before I could sleep, not compulsively, just that an unfinished project sat in my chest like a stone until it was done. She learned that I called my mother every Sunday and that those calls were the fixed point of my week. She learned not to talk to me when I was measuring, not because I'd said anything, but because she watched long enough to understand. You count under your breath, she said one morning in the trailer. When? When you're running numbers, you move your lips a little. I didn't know that, I said. She went back to her laptop. It's endearing. I went back to the materials order and said nothing because there was nothing to say to that except something that would embarrass me. The oak table was finished in November. I'd put the last coat of finish on it a week after the porch conversation with Ellie and let it cure for 10 days and then stood in the garage looking at it for a long time. 12 weeks of evenings and weekends, every joint cut by hand, the grain running the full length of the top without a single seam. It was the best thing I'd made. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I called my mother, told her the table was done. She said, bring it over, let me see it. I said, it's 200 pounds, Mom. She said, then bring a picture. I brought a picture. She looked at it for a long time and then looked at me the way she did when she wanted to say something she wasn't sure how to say. It looks like it belongs somewhere permanent, she said. It does, I said. She looked at me again. You seem different, she said, not a question. I might be, I said. She nodded, went back to her tea. Didn't push. That was her way. She'd say the thing once and let you sit with it. She'd learned that was how I worked. She'd had 20 years of practice. There was a night in late winter, 3 months after the porch, when I was finishing a materials invoice at the kitchen table and looked up and Ellie was asleep on the couch with a folder of papers across her chest and her shoes still on. The lamp was on beside her. The room was quiet. I sat there for a while not doing the invoice. I'd spent a long time in rooms that were quiet in the wrong way. The quiet of a house that only has one person in it. The quiet of evenings that go by without anything to mark them. I'd gotten used to that quiet the way you get used to a low-grade ache. After a while, you stop noticing it's there until something removes it and you realize how constant it had been. I got up and turned the lamp down low and put a blanket over her without waking her and went back to the invoice. Finished it, turned off the kitchen light. The folder was still on her chest when I checked, rising and falling. I went to bed in the particular way of a man who has somewhere to be in the morning and someone to not wake up on his way there. That was new. That was everything. I went to Frank's office a week before we got married and told him I was in. He already knew. He'd known from the moment Ellie told him about the porch. But he was the kind of man who needed to hear something said out loud before he could fully believe it. I said it plainly. He shook my hand 4 times. We got married the following spring. Not a big event. The crew came. My mother wore the blue dress she saved for things that mattered, and cried at the part where I read what I'd written down because I knew I'd forget it if I didn't. Frank wore a bolo tie and shook my hand 4 times, which was 4 more times than the occasion required. Derek sent a card and didn't attend. Some things take longer to settle than others. I didn't hold it against him. He'd been honest with me, even if his reasons weren't clean. You can work with that. Ellie took over the business development side of the company. She was better at it than anyone expected, which meant she was exactly as good as she'd always been, only now people were finally paying attention. I kept running the bills. The company grew steadily, not dramatically, not in ways that ended up in press releases. Just the kind of growth that happens when people do real work and treat each other decently. Frank's treatment went well. He was back at the yard 3 days a week by summer, driving Ellie and me crazy in the best possible way, second-guessing the materials orders, insisting he still knew the subcontractors better than we did, asking me every Monday if I'd check the punch list like I hadn't been checking punch lists for years. I let him. Some things you don't rush. The oak table is in our kitchen now. It has coffee rings on it, a stack of bills in the corner, the blueprints I spread out there on Sunday mornings when the light is right. It's been touched and moved and leaned on, and it hasn't shifted once. Every joint is still true. One evening I came home to find something new. 2 initials scratched into the corner of the tabletop. Small, careful letters, not mine, and not asked for. Ellie did it, I found out later, with a small nail she'd found in my toolbox. She'd done it one evening while I was at the site, and she'd never mentioned it, just worked them in quiet and sure and left. I saw it the next morning when I was making coffee, stood there for a long time looking at it. I didn't say anything to her. Some things don't need to be said. They just need to be seen. There are things you build because you need proof you're still here. A table that nobody asked for, a bench for a mother's porch, a chair because the wood was beautiful and it would have been wrong to waste it. I built for years and never thought anyone would care what I made. I built because it felt like the truest thing I knew how to do, and because somewhere in me I believed that if you kept making things with enough care and enough honesty, eventually the right person would recognize it. Not the company or the title or the story about how far you'd come. Just the work itself, the grain and the joint, and the time you spent getting it right when no one was watching. You put a lot of yourself into things. She said it standing in my garage looking at an oak tabletop on a Saturday morning when neither of us had said anything yet about what we were to each other. She meant the table, she meant the man who made it. She meant both things at once, and she said it like it was just a fact, like she was reading a grade stake and reporting back what was true. I was a man with a workbench and a house I was still fixing, and a life that was decent and completely still. She was a woman who had gone to her father before there was ever a deal, and chosen, quietly and without ceremony, the man she wanted before anyone knew she was choosing. That's the whole story. Everything else was just the time between when she knew and when I found out. If you've ever felt invisible to people who should have seen you, if you've ever kept showing up and doing the work and wondered if any of it was landing anywhere, this story is for you. Subscribe to Whispering Porch Stories. We're here every Tuesday and Friday with a new one. Leave a like if Ellie's story stayed with you, and in the comments, Has someone ever chosen you before you knew you were worth choosing? We'd love to hear it. See you next time.